In my last video, I decided that I want to check out why people love classes that much. So I decided to, from now on, create new things with the idea of using classes. So for the most part, I understand how classes work, what there are. How to interact with them. They're cool features, but I never really used them. I couldn't see a need. So I created this thing. It's a Googler. Let's search for something. I rebranded my channel, as you might have seen, since a long time now, but it's actually a backlogging issue that I have. I record far more often than I'm willing to upload. Nevertheless, I wanted to search for a C# logo. Boom, and it Googles that. Say I want to search for something on YouTube. There's the prefix of Y, and then beninging. Ini beninging. Binin. And then also, I am going to start using different emojis from what I used before. The ones that I used before were just Windows font emojis, but now I'm actually going to use Google emojis, which I have to download as pictures. So let's think actually just now what emojis I'm going to use for this video's thumbnail, and it's going to be class, because we're gonna talk about classes. And that I'll figure out myself later, but you just saw that with different prefixes, I could search within different searching engines. It's not like I Googled class using Google and then there was a result from Emojipedia. No, I searched in Emojipedia. It's really, really nice. At first, this whole thing at least looked much simpler. But then Miha helped me in making a whole code review and eventually rewrote my class to actually take care, or rather, to use the advantages of using a class. And from that I learned a lot. So thank you, Miha. Shout out to you. I'm going to go step by step in explaining how this works. Now, since this isn't a scripted video, it might be a little long-winded, so be prepared. First of all, let me show you how I actually call this thing. So Windows B, that's my hotkey that I use. So search is the name of the class. I call the class, providing something to it, to make an instance of it. I explained in my last video the difference between the class itself and the class instance. So if you don't quite understand what that is, go watch my previous video. So now I call showVisual from the instance, or rather prototype, of the class. And that lets me have this. But there's also a way to use something else. For example, you already have your runner and you don't want to have a separate hotkey for the Googler. You can implement that. You would just have to call, instead of showVisual, you would call feed query, and then there would be the input variable that you somehow got from your thing that you use for input. However, I like having this GUI input box. So let's start. First of all, extends. I didn't use that before. By creating a class that extends some other class, we now have direct access to it. What does that mean? We'll get to it in a second. So, the new method. This is what is called when you put brackets after a class. So you try to instantiate it, the new method is called. So you can decide what that actually does for yourself by creating your own new method. In it, I made a parameter search engine. So if you put Google, Google is now your default search engine. As you saw, I didn't need to put G and then the search. No, I just put my search right here and it considered it to be Google. However, we can change that. So if I go YouTube instead and search for something, it searches on YouTube by default, which is really nice. So you can define your default search engine, meaning if you wanted to, you could just have multiple hotkeys for your searching engines. However, I like to keep my single hotkey, which by default is Google, but have prefixes for other things like YouTube, emoji, and adding new search engines is very, very easy. I'll teach you how to do that later when we get to it. So, super, a keyword that I didn't know anything about, yet heard about it from time to time. Turns out it's very, very simple. Super is just the GUI class. So super is the class that this one extends. And that's literally it. And for me, at least, super sounded like this scary keyword that does something very complicatedly. No, turns out not. However, you would expect that I could just call super like normal. Well, unfortunately, in AutoHotkey, you have to call the new method explicitly, which is not what you want the new method to be. Well, the reason why it has 2 underscores before it is to signify that, yo, you don't call this explicitly. It's done in some other way. Because, look, I don't call the new method, I just have brackets, and they are interpreted as the new method automatically. However, it doesn't work for super. It's pretty lame. When we make a new GUI that's always on top and doesn't have a caption. So let's see. Yeah, let's go on Discord. It's still here, although it does lose focus, which makes sense. And there's no caption. It would look wacky if it did have a caption. These 2 methods are implemented by me. I added these methods to the GUI class. Imagine you can actually do that. I've shown those off in my previous videos, and I explained them as well. In my previous video, I'm pretty sure I explained how this works. However, dark mode used to set the background color of the GUI and decide the font. Micha noticed that that's kind of weird. A function or a method should have one responsibility. So I split that function into 2. Make font nicer does exactly that. It sets my favorite color, my favorite font, and my default font size, which we can change to something different. And we did, to 30. Margin X, let me explain what that does more concretely. We'll get to what I just deleted and what that does, although you can probably imagine. By default, there is a margin. And it's probably going to be easier to show off when I don't have this margin X thing. Well, that's awkward. Okay, basically, you create an input box within a GUI, and on the left, it will still have some type of margin, but actually do go to the end of the GUI. And it ends up looking like your cursor is not in the middle of your screen, but instead a bit to the right. Margin X plus specifying the width to the edit box, that is the same as the GUI, fixes that. I guess a good enough explanation. So let's pop this back. This is a Windows style. That removes that outline. And now it just looks like, here it is. Now it just looks like a GUI, and that's it. Although this outline technically still exists, or rather the input box still exists, but we don't see the outline. That looks kind of rough. I don't like how it looks. It's unnecessary, so I removed that. I did the same thing for my runner, by the way. Cool. Now, this is what is good for classes. This keyword. I brushed this off, but first we called GUI and made a new object. And that object now became the search class. So instead of creating a GUI object into a variable, it assumes that this class instance, so the search class instance or prototype, is now that object. So when we call this, we're actually operating on the GUI object that we took, which is great. Meaning now in any of the other methods, I can just reference this to reference that GUI object and take whatever I need. That makes it so much easier to deal with scope issues and to separate code into multiple functions that have at least more or less a single responsibility. So when we call dark mode and make font nicer, we call those methods on the object, on the GUI object that we made with super new. This margin X, meaning this GUI object's margin X is now 0. And we can easily add new properties and methods and whatever else to this class instance, essentially to this GUI object, and have it all together very nicely. All we need is just reference this, and that's all. So when we call the new method, so this situation, we pass the name of the search engine. So that's the parameter, it goes here. Let's look at available search engines. It's actually a map. So here's the name that we specified, and that is what it becomes. So the start of the link of where we want to search. And after that goes our actual search, but we'll get to that. So there's YouTube, emoji, and you can easily add more. let's go to actually Wikipedia and let's search something on it. I don't know, pen. Well, hold on. All right, let's pick something different, something that is more easily shown off. So I made the search request on Yandex. Now what you have to do is look at the link. So first, all that, and then search question mark text. What that exactly is depends on where you're searching, but basically you want to get the link before your actual search request starts going. So I wrote 10 pounds in kilograms. So you have to copy the link before 10. And now you can just copy and then go Yandex and just paste that link. Boom. Now you can pick Yandex as your search engine. Not sure why you would, but just showing this off. So it's quite easy to add new ones because this single map takes care of them. This we'll come back to later. Alright, so from this map, which lies on the instance, on the prototype of this class, we pick the link by its name. And now this is the selected search engine. Cool. Now we add the edit box to our GUI. X0 meaning start at the start of the GUI, at the leftist position. Make my cursor centered. This window style so you don't see the outline of the edit box, and set the background color. And the background color will be the same as the back color of the GUI overall. So the input box and the GUI itself will have the same color. It's pretty nice that we can just set the background color of the GUI once and then reuse it again. And we set the width to be equal to the width of the GUI, which is set here, by the way. The reason why I'm using screen width and screen height is because, say I set it to 1200 and it looks like this on my machine. But then, if someone has a 4K monitor, for example, and they use the same thing, it looks tiny. Maybe it looks tiny, I don't even know if it does. However, if I take the variable of screen width, divide by my specific screen width, and multiply it by what I want it to be, now this GUI is going to look the same on every machine. Whether or not you actually want this is a good question, but I think you do. And then we use round because when you set the width of a GUI, you can't have decimal values, like no floats, only full numbers. So we do that. Width is the width of the GUI, and top margin is essentially the y coordinate, the vertical coordinate, how much until it appears. Okay. After we create the edit, we put it into a class variable. I've been told that that's not what you say. It's an instance variable that we can now access from wherever. Once again, really nice. And we call the method of this class register hotkeys. Let's check it out. While this GUI is active, once again, we take the GUI's handle, we make a hotkey, enter, that triggers the search. And when we press escape, while this GUI is active, we deregister hotkeys. Let's go one by one. Trigger search. So this happens when we press enter. So we type something in, press enter. First, the window gets minimized. Then, dynamically reselect engine. And to that, we give the text that's here, that's currently here. Okay, what is that? You can already notice that it goes on and on and on in terms of this calls that, and then this calls that, and so on and so on. So at first you might think that, well, this is more annoying to work with. Perhaps it feels that way, but once you actually start working with this type of structure, it ends up being so much easier to understand what the code does and how it does it than if it was just a huge function that does it all. So, dynamically reselect engine. Remember how we had prefixes to search in some specific site? This method decides that. So, search engine nicknames is in another map in which I actually leave the prefixes or nicknames for different searching engines. So, not that. If I specify G and then some search, it will still search in Google. So, why would you need that? Because, as I shown you previously, you can set your default search engine to be YouTube. And then when you want to search on Google instead, you can press G and here you go. So G resolves to this once again. And this is better than just writing out the link again, because I don't have to rewrite the same thing. It's just a variable. Okay, so in this map, we try to search for nicknames, for prefixes, if we set any, using regex. So if there is G at the start of the query and then a space, then we reselect the engine. So if you wanted to search for, I don't know, G and space, let's see what that does. Nothing. But let's be real, you wouldn't. And if you did, there's always this. So even though it sounds scary, it's not actually scary. So we do a for loop. Is there a, hold on. Is there a prefix at the start of the query with a space? If so, we reselect the selected engine, which we selected here, when we specified it in the instantiation of the class. And now it's value. What the fuck is value? We refer to this because we're for looping this map. So this is the key, this is the value. So we select engine of that value. And we remove the prefix, and the space. So starting from the third character and until the last character is now the actual input. Now, you can't normally do this, but you can with the string library that I'm using by Descolada. It's somewhere in the comments. See? Usually you'd use substring, a HK function, but now you can just treat a string as if it's an object, as if it's a class, and specify, oh, I want a part of this string, starting from this index to this one. It is inclusive, by the way. So when I say 3, so 3 included, and then until the last one, including that one as well. If we caught a prefix, we break. So go out of this for loop and return the input. So, long story short, what this function does is checks for prefixes. If it finds one, it selects the correct engine and gives back the actual input that we want to search for. Okay. We were on trigger search. Where is it? Oh, here it is. So we did that, and now we have the actual query. We feed the query into the feed query function. What is a query? Remember I taught you how to get the link properly? Well, this part, so the opposite part of what we needed for the search engine, is called a query. I didn't know that term. It's pretty nice. What does feed query do? First of all, let's search for something, I guess, annoying. Sure, that too. Look at the link. It has a bunch of %23, %24, %20, and the actual search is as normal, the same way that I put it in. Thing is, if we put the link as is, it would ignore some characters, some other characters would turn into different ones, and it wouldn't work. So you'd have to escape, I guess, some special characters, and there are many of them. My program does it by itself. So sanitize query does that. It gets all the special characters that might be in your search request or query, and it transforms them into the proper encoding for URLs. So, once again, not usually a thing. You would use stir split to turn this string into an array, where each character of this string is now a key, or rather a value. And there are how many? Let's check. Stir length 24, so it would be 24 characters, 24 keys in that array. So this is the same thing as using substring and specifying nothing, meaning every single character. Now we have that array, we for loop it, and there's some magic that I didn't realize how it worked correctly. Ord, an interesting function. Ord is the opposite of char, or char, I think char, yeah. So char, or character, you give a hex value, or basically the Unicode for a character, and it returns the actual character as a string. Ord is the other way around. You specify a character to it as a string, and it returns its number. If it's ANSI, it returns the ANSI variant. If it's Unicode, it's Unicode variant. However, as HK does in its annoying fashion, what we're looking for here is the hex value, so 16 base of that number, but it returns a decimal number, basically base 10. I didn't realize that, and it broke for a moment. Now that I know that I need to transform that decimal value into a hex value, it's fixed again. I use my trans to hex function. You don't have to use it, it's just for niceness, because trans to hex and then you specify a number looks way nicer than format. And what is this? It's magic. It's what that is. I don't know what that does. I would have to go to the docs. But with the naming of this function, it's pretty understandable what this function does, more or less. So you give it a number and it transforms that decimal number, base 10, into base 16 or hex, which is what we want. Sometimes you want the 0x before the hex number, but sometimes you don't. That's what the hex prefix parameter there for. In this situation, we don't want the 0x, so we specify false. Now we have the correct number for what we want. So that was a space, and it got converted into 20. We put a % before that, and here we go. We correctly escaped that symbol. So we do the same thing for every symbol there. By the way, I didn't recognize that we're trying to replace a lot of characters that we don't need to. However, there's probably C++ level optimizations that if there's nothing to replace, don't do anything. So we probably don't need to optimize this. Now that we have a correct query, which is escaped, we return it. Let's go back to trigger search. Feed query. That's what we did. We sanitized it, and now that is just a part of the link. What goes after this? Perfect. We got the full link, which is what we were trying to do this whole time. We use run link to run the link. Pretty simple. You can just use run link, sure, but sometimes you use that function and sure, it runs the link and your browser starts blinking orange, but it doesn't automatically open. That's why I made this function, to make sure it opens. So we wait for the window, meaning if your browser wasn't opened at the time, it opens it and then activates it. And you specify the win title of your browser as a parameter. I use Google Chrome. I'm not sure why, but I still don't have any ads despite Manifest 3. So, I mean, I'm glad. So that's why I use run link. Unnecessary, but I think it's nice. And after feed query, we deregister hotkeys. So before we registered the hotkeys, meaning enter, and the on event for escape, which, don't worry, is deleted automatically. However, there is no on event for enter. At least I don't think so. If there is, please let me know in the comments. Because I didn't even try to search. I don't think there are. And if I'm wrong, I would like to be proven wrong. In deregister hotkeys, we, well, deregister the hotkeys. Same directive, hotf win active, that GUI, now enter off. And after that, we destroy this GUI. And that is pretty much all. In feed query, we do that. Yep. So we're done. Let's see anything else that I want to point out. Show visual. This is the method. This is the method that we call to get this input box. Once again, we can just call feed query if we already have the input from some other place, or use show visual to have this message box. No, hell no. To have this input box pop up so we can type in and do that. See, we use this to reference the GUI object that we instantiated and just call the show method of any GUI object. We specify y, top margin, which is this, to tell it, oh, be this many, I guess, pixels from the top and this wide. And we have those as instance variables. I'll try to remember the difference. I say class variables, but that would actually mean that they're static. Now this is a class variable. This is an instance variable. So when you specify something as static, be it a variable, property, or a method in a class, it's a class variable, method, or whatever. Because there's some, like, okay, say there is a class called classy and you call a method called meth. This method has to be static because you didn't create an instance for it. But if you did create an instance of that class with brackets, now meth has to be not static. And by the way, say there is some static method or property or whatever else that you want to use in your non-static thing. So let's show off what I mean. So say feed query, for whatever reason, we want to make it static, to make it a class method. Well, now, every time that we call it, we can't use this anymore, because this refers to the instance, the object of the class that we created when we called it, when we called the new method. But the thing is, we didn't. So we can't use this to refer to feed query anymore. The solution is very simple. Now you have to specify the actual class when you call it. Or, correct me if I'm wrong, this base feed query. I haven't tested this. It probably doesn't work. That's just an idea. You can test this out if you're interested. But usually, yeah, you just specify the name of the class and call it like you would in any other situation. However, don't make something static if you're going to call the class. But if all you're gonna do is just call methods from the class without creating an instance, you might as well have everything static. So it's up to you to decide. Maybe you want something to happen when you call it and specify something, and therefore everything is not static. If you use your class as pretty much just a container for a couple of methods, then everything could be just static. So it's hard to explain because it really depends, as anything does in programming, to be fair. Okay. I think I explained everything about this. Oh, I think I didn't mention this, but if you wanted to create a new nickname for a search engine that you added, say it's Yandex, you go ya without a space, remember that, and you just do the same thing, this available search engines, Yandex, boom. Congratulations. Now, when you do that, once again, not that, yeah, 10 pounds, for fuck's sake, 2 kilograms. Now I searched on Yandex. So it's very easy to add new search engines, and it's very easy to add new prefixes. So that's how you do it. Let's do a Gaip comma. I love NeoVim and Vim. Like, it's so easy and fast to make it look nice. There is a formatter for AutoHotkey, I'm going to be real, but it has some issues. I'm talking about the formatter of the extension that I use by Thugby. Very good extension, working formatter, but I have some issues with it. For example, let's look. I guess I don't have any comments, huh? Seriously. I want to search for a single line comment. Okay, this for example. The formatter, for some odd fucking reason, uses tabs before same line comments instead of spaces. Like, sure, I see the point of tabs versus spaces for indentation. Both have their advantages and disadvantages, but surely don't want to use tabs for indenting a same line comment. That's ridiculous. And so far, at least I don't know of a method to change that to a space. I think I did by going into the files and changing something, but having to always do that every time your extension updates, well, you're not going to do that. So yeah, that's the reason I don't use the formatter by the extension pretty much at all, because it has some issues still. I'm not entirely happy with it. Okay. I have brain rot, like I'm not sure what I haven't covered. So, if I forgot something, say that in the comments. Say what you didn't quite understand, or maybe wanted me to cover a bit more in detail. I'll make sure I remember that, put it on my, not exactly whiteboard, a corkboard, and I'll make a video where I go into more detail on that. It's really nice to help people learn V2, and now V2 classes, and how nice they actually are. I hope this video could give you some insight on why this is worth learning and using in your projects. And if you did learn something, leave a comment and subscribe to the channel. I'm going to start branching out. Barely, not much, but I'll start having some non-HK videos. For example, something about VS Code, its extensions, maybe JavaScript about that. C#, something that I learned, currently learning C#. There's a lot that I don't know. Maybe I want to share that with you. NeoVim and the NeoVim extension specifically, how I set it up, how I use it, all that. So now this channel won't only have HK content, sometimes you'll see some other content as well. Okay, thank you for watching and goodbye.